Welcome. My name is Scott Williams, and I'm the Membership Director at the League of American Bicyclists, and as a result, also one of the main liaisons with our club members. We appreciate all your support and are happy to support you with everything we can give you, including our insurance policy, which we've worked for, I think, more than a decade now with American Specialty. And this is one of two webinars about the insurance policy. In December, we get people together and talk about how the current year went, get any feedback to incorporate in the following year's policy, answer any general questions you have about the policy, and then we'll have another webinar in January, I believe it's Monday the 13th, in which we'll look at the specifics of the 2014 policy and take any additional questions that people have. My guest to discuss the insurance policy tonight is Marla Peters of American Specialty. She's a Vice President of Special Programs there, and we've been working with Marla for, I think, more than a decade on the League insurance program. So she knows a lot about us and a lot about you, and I am going to turn the screen over to Marla and let her go ahead and take the presentation. Use the question panel to type in questions, and I will pose them to Marla as we have opportunities to do so. We have plenty of time for questions at the end to make sure you understand the insurance policy. So, Marla, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Can you see my screen okay there?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I am here tonight with Renee Watterson, who many of you who are on the call may have worked with before. She's just going to help me field questions as they come up at the end. And one thing I wanted to mention by way of background for those of you who have been working with us for several years is that we are also adding another team member to our service team, and her name is Chris Whitted. She is not able to join us this evening, but I just wanted to let you all know her name because you may very well be speaking with her when you enroll in the program in next year, early next year, and if you have questions throughout the year. So with that, as Scott mentioned, our goals for tonight are to provide a brief review of the insurance program, but not actually to do a complete coverage summary. We're not going to talk a lot about the details of the program, but we will be doing that in the January call. So we wanted to give you a little bit of background and information about what happened over the past year, and then talk about what is coming up for the 2014 policy year in our plans, and then get your input and feedback so that we can always use that to improve the program and make sure that it's a good fit for your organizations as you all evolve and change to better meet your mission. So for the 2013, well, actually, just to give a little bit of background so that everybody's kind of oriented as to what we're talking about with the insurance program. There are two pieces when you enroll in the program that you automatically receive. One is general liability insurance, and the other is participant accident insurance. And just to provide an overview, the general liability coverage is the coverage that applies if somebody brings a claim against you alleging that you did something wrong, and often that is in the form of a lawsuit. And the insurance coverage can pay for any judgments against you or any settlements made, and it also, probably most importantly, pays for your attorney fees that are involved to defend you. So in the event your club would ever become involved in something like that, American Specialty would assign an attorney, defense counsel to work with you, and then the insurance policy, the general liability, covers that type of claim. The most frequent type of claim we see is one where a rider is involved in an accident involving either a pedestrian, another rider, or some type of road condition or obstacle causes the accident and an injury results, and one of the people involved, or all of them in some cases, bring a lawsuit against the club, or sometimes it's against an individual rider that was involved in the accident. The participant accident coverage applies when you are injured and you have medical bills as a result. It pays for members or for registered participants on special events It pays medical bills associated with injuries that you may suffer while taking part in the ride. It's excess of your own insurance, but it can pay the deductibles and co-pays under your insurance policy, which often can also be a sizable amount, so it's an important benefit for the league. And those two coverages apply automatically when you sign up through the program. In 2013, 594 advocacy organizations and bicycle clubs purchased coverage through the league's program. About 81% were bicycle clubs and 19% were advocacy organizations. And that was consistent with the breakdown between the two last year. The program is a little larger this year. Last year we had 581 organizations participate. Last year, many of you may know, we implemented a new structure which was designed to, again, make sure that the insurance program is keeping up with the way you all do business. And so we changed the pricing structure so that advocacy organizations, which we define as those organizations that have little or no regular ride activity, that they have a flat premium that applies. And for those that don't have any regular rides, they're able to buy a general liability only option because they don't need that coverage we talked about for participant accident. And they can also, though, if they do have a special event where maybe it's a fundraiser or they are charging a fee to participate in a special event type of a ride, that can be covered for advocacy organizations also for an additional premium. Bicycle clubs have always paid their premium based on a per member rate, and that still applied last year in 2013, subject to a minimum premium, and then they also can schedule their special events separate from their regular rides for additional premium. And those are paid for based on a per participant rate of how many individuals actually signed up and registered and participate on the ride. There are also a few optional coverages, and a lot of you took part and took advantage of those last year. The main one that has been of most interest to the membership is the directors and officers liability coverage. It's important to point out that the directors and officers themselves are covered under that general liability policy that we talked about. So if somebody's injured and the directors or officers are named individually, they are covered already under that general liability policy. But the directors and officers liability policy covers wrongful acts. So it basically covers lawsuits that aren't covered under the general liability policy. An example might be if you had to remove somebody's membership status and they sued the club for discrimination, or if there were an allegation that the board had misused the organization's funds. Or in the event you have employees, it can cover something like a harassment suit or a wrongful termination claim. So that coverage is, you sign up for that separate from the general liability and participant accident, and 140 clubs purchased that last year. There's also a bike refurbishment benefit for those of you, and this is obviously a smaller percentage of you, but if you renovate or you refurbish bicycles and you either give them to people in the community or you sell them, there's a coverage associated with the product liability that may be associated with that, and you can purchase that. Non-owned hired auto liability is available on an optional basis as well, and that is if you have individuals driving on behalf of the club, either a rented car or even if they're driving their own vehicles, that exposes the club to potential liability, and so you have the opportunity. It costs about $250 to buy that coverage as well. It doesn't cover the individuals driving their own cars. That really needs to fall to their own insurance, but this coverage can be important for the club, and so some of you took advantage of that last year. You also have the ability to increase your general liability limits by an additional $1 million under that excess liability limit. The league makes that available to you. And then finally, there's an optional participant accident benefit, which more people took advantage of in the past, not as many last year in 2013. But what that is for are those times that you have an event where a lot of non-members are going to be participating, but you aren't charging a fee, so you don't need to register it as a special event necessarily. but if you want to provide those participants with that participant accident coverage, you're able to buy that on an optional basis. And then also the LCIs automatically receive general liability coverage for their individual education activities. So that just gives you a little background on, I wanted to give an overview of the benefits and then also let you know kind of who's taking advantage of those and how many. One thing we did last year, I think it was helpful to people because we're going to be talking today about what's going to happen with the rates next year. So there's a lot of numbers on this page, but really what they are designed to do is just give you a snapshot of how the rates have changed over the years. And there are different rates for different categories. As your size increases, the rates become lower. But this just shows you the bicycle club rates for the first 1,000 people that have applied over the years. And as you can see, it's kind of been up or down. We have been, in the past few years, in a situation where the rates have increased, which is really a combination, and we're going to talk about this a little more. It's a combination of the league's losses and also what's happening in the insurance marketplace. So you're kind of impacted by your own experience, but also by the experience of people who really are not related to the league directly. So that gives you a snapshot. If you wanted to just look at if you looked at the year-to-year increase over time, it's about a 5% increase each year. So somewhat of an inflationary increase, but because of the way the insurance market impacts the program, you can see that we've gone from increases to decreases in several years where we had flat renewals. I think it's always helpful to give a little bit of information about the claims, because obviously the reason you all buy insurance is to have coverage when you have a claim. So I think it's helpful to know the types of things that can happen and that we do actually have claims. And I know those clubs that have been involved, appreciate the fact that this coverage was available to protect them. And also that, American Specialty works closely with you during what can be a really difficult time in terms of having to gather information, and can be very stressful, obviously, to be involved in a lawsuit. We historically have had about 7 general liability claims per year, and that's a small number of claims when you compare it to the number of rides and special events that are taking place with 594 clubs, but they do have the potential to be very large. In the past several years, we've had 2 claims, one in 2008 and one from 2011 that's still ongoing, that are estimated to cost around $400,000 each. Both of those situations involved pedestrians who were struck by a rider during an event. We also had another similar but not as large situation occur this past policy year. And just to give you a couple other examples of claims that came in 2013, we had 2 separate individual claims where a rider had an accident as a result of road conditions and suffered, in both cases, serious injuries, and in both cases have retained the services of an attorney. And there is litigation involving the club in both of those cases. So those are the types of examples. I guess it probably doesn't surprise anybody that the injuries, or that the lawsuits generally are related to injuries that can occur. We have had a few where property damage was involved, where, for example, somebody hit somebody's expensive car and damaged it, and that type of claim can also be covered under this policy. On the participant accident side, we have really just seen a trend, especially in recent years since 2008, where the participant accident claims are increasing. And obviously part of that is just because if you guys are doing a good job, which you are, you've got people out there who are riding more people riding more often, and that's a wonderful thing. But the unfortunate part is that that can also create more injuries, and that affects the losses under the participant accident program. But in addition to there being more claims, we're also seeing that the cost of those claims have gone up over time. The average cost of a claim was about $1,600 in 2008, and that was up to $2,200 in 2012. And at this point for 2013, it's looking like that number is closer to 3,500. So you can see that increasing trend. The average loss per club has more than doubled in this time frame. And again, with 2013, looks like that loss per club may actually triple. There's a lot of things that may be contributing in addition to just having more people riding more often. We have medical inflation, which is a factor. And we have also seen that although the league tends to have a very high percentage of claimants who have other insurance, which helps keep your costs down, we have seen in recent years that the number declined slightly with fewer people having other insurance. And we also all know that there's a trend for our personal health coverages to have higher deductibles, or there's high deductible plans out there that people may have elected or their employers may have moved to those. And when somebody elects a high deductible plan and then they have an injury, the league policy ends up paying more. It's a good thing, obviously, for the person who suffered the injury, because they can end up having what might have been large out-of-pocket costs be paid for by this program, and they have no out-of-pocket costs. But the large deductible impact may be shifting more of those losses to the league program. So again, that I think is why we're seeing this trend of increasing losses, where we were at $75,000 in 2008 and are projecting to be closer to $300,000 in 2013. On a positive note, there have been no paid directors and officers or employment practices claims within the club program. That's not entirely surprising with smaller organizations who have fewer employees. We often don't see activity in that area. It's just another one where it's a good coverage to have if you do need it. So the factors affecting 2014, and I'm not trying to paint a doom and gloom picture, but just really to provide the background so everybody has an understanding of what goes into making the rates in this insurance program. We have had liability losses above what underwriters would be expecting for this program, and we have the continuing increasing participant accident loss trend that are impacting the program. And at the same time, in the general liability market, especially for amateur sports associations, which the league is considered, at least from American Specialties perspective, we group you in as an amateur sports organization, and the rates in that industry have been increasing, and that trend is still continuing at this time. So that brings us to kind of where we are looking for 2014. We are planning to keep the current program structure. We think that the structure that was implemented in 2013 worked well. I think Renee had positive feedback. I know there was a little bit of a learning curve with enrolling because the system was a little different. And I know you had lots of questions, and I hope that they were answered quickly and to your satisfaction. But overall, I think the reaction was positive. So we're planning to keep the program structure the same and the limits and the benefits the same as well. And so this chart here shows what the proposed rates are for 2014. It's also notable, I think, that we really do have low minimum premiums in this program. So if you are one of the clubs or advocacy organizations who's paying a minimum premium, it's really an affordable option for you to get solid coverage on behalf of quality insurance companies. And the minimum premiums they're not going to be flat, but they are staying a little closer to where they were in 2013. The rates per member for the bicycle clubs are going up. If you add the general liability and the participant accident together, 16.1%. And the special event rates are also going to be up about 16%. But as I mentioned, you'll notice the minimum premium is closer to a 5% increase. So the dollar amount there should not be really creating much of an impact this year. The other thing, I guess, too, when I mentioned that the minimum premiums are very affordable, if you look at where the majority of the participants in the program are, about half of the league's membership that are in the program are paying, not counting their special events, around $250 or less for insurance. So again, I think very affordable and providing an important benefit for your members. on the participant accident side if they are injured while they're riding. This next slide just also continues with the rates, the education benefit that you are able to purchase. If it's classroom only, which is a general liability only coverage, is going to be $33 if you utilize all LCIs. And if you use LCIs, but sometimes you don't utilize LCIs for those classes, that premium will be a flat $44. And then if you do the on-bike education activities, again, the rate there is going to change by about 5%, $126 flat premium for all your education courses if you always use LCIs. And if you sometimes do not use LCIs, then the premium for that will be $168. One thing to note there is that that applies only if you have the type of education courses where you are signing people up by name. If you're just having something for your club members or something informal, but you're doing a safety briefing or providing some type of educational information, that doesn't necessarily cause you to need to purchase this benefit. It's only if you are having more formal education courses where you enroll people by name. And then also I talked about the bike refurbishment benefit that you are able to buy on an optional basis. And for the few of you that actually own or lease an office year-round, there is a charge to apply for your premises liability there, and that premium is going to be $55 in 2014. So that is what I had in terms of providing some background about the program and letting you know the plans for 2014. So that takes us really to the question and answer part of the webinar tonight. And I don't know if Scott is getting lots of questions, or I can't see them on my side yet.
I don't have many questions. People can look and find their question panel and type in their questions. Someone asked, if an incident with one of our members results in a claim, will it affect our premiums during the year? And if so, how?
That would not affect your individual premiums, which is one of the great things about being able to participate in a program like this, that an association like the League is sponsoring and making available, because you aren't directly impacted by your own losses. So, for example, the clubs that I mentioned that have had the unfortunate experience of having $100,000 plus losses, they pay the same premiums that everybody else does.
Okay, I have a request that you show the rate chart again. Could you flip back to that?
For 2014?
2014, yes. And how certain are these rates at this point?
These are the rates unless we hear anything that changes, you know, if there's any feedback that somehow changes how we move forward. But these are solid proposed renewal rates.
Okay. And let's see, I have everybody came in at once, so I'm just processing what we have here. We have two questions about the auto coverage, the non-owned hired auto. Is there any change in the coverage, and have we had any claims on the auto coverage?
There is not a change. It's something that each club has to fill out their own application and answer a couple questions. It's a pretty brief process, but and then that club has its own separate limits and its own separate policy. We have had some losses under that program, but I don't have those in front of me, although I can say they were under $5,000 type losses. I don't remember the specifics of them. I didn't bring that with me. The cost usually is around $250. Are there any that are more than that? I mean, between $250 and $300. Yeah, I think for that coverage.
Okay, I have someone saying their club membership is based on households, so a household is a member rather than individuals or families being made distinct. They estimate the number of members for insurance purposes from the number of households, having decided through some scientific method that they have 1.75 members per household. I know that typically you say families should be counted as two, but this is somewhat different because everybody is a household. Um, any thoughts on that?
Right, but they're not counting. So they don't know how many families per se, and they're not looking at a household as necessarily a family. They just have their own way that they've derived their membership number.
Right. Well, I believe that you just when you sign up, you don't sign up as an individual or a family. Just a membership that you purchase is a household membership, whether there's one of you or 18.
So technically, we would say, I think that would count as two.
Okay.
But it's something we could talk to that club about separately. Maybe maybe there's some nuances or details that we don't have over this call. So we could always talk about it further.
Okay. One thing that I think we've appreciated is your flexibility and your willingness to listen to individual situations and come up with a fair assessment based on that.
Right. I think, yeah, because one question we might have for them would be if they know who's in the family, because if we don't know that those are members, then we can't, if we don't know, for example, who the members of the family are, or at least the name of the family, then we wouldn't know that they were covered if there were a participant accident claim. So there has to be some way that they're able to tie the membership back to people in the event of a claim.
Okay. Some clarification on the insurance coverage. You were saying that it is not something you have to worry about unless you are registering people by name. Does it make any difference if the people registering for classes are club members? I mean, if they're only doing education to club members, but they are registering by name, should they be purchasing the insurance, or excuse me, well, the insurance, the education insurance, or not?
All members, but they register by name, but they're all members. Sorry, we're having just Renee and I are discussing. I don't know if that one has come up. I don't know if we've had that scenario. So, right, I think, we might need to follow up with that person. I do feel like that has come up before, but I can't remember if we said they needed to buy the education benefit or not, if it was always 100% members. I think maybe we said that would be considered a regular club activity. Don't you? I feel like that is the answer, but I would like to confirm back or in your follow-up note, Scott.
Okay.
You could do that.
All right. So, Alan, did you get that? We need to check on it. We think it's a regular club activity and doesn't require additional coverage, but we're going to check, and we will get back in touch. So someone who has a small all-volunteer club, 125 members, is just asking about why they might want to buy the D&O policy. Can you go back over what scenarios might cause an all-volunteer club to elect that?
Well, if they have a board of directors, so they have individuals who are considered their board, and they are making any decisions on behalf of the membership, if they're managing the club's funds or that type of thing, if they were to have a lawsuit against them, questioning how they are using the funds, or if they ever had to remove a member, those are really the types of situations that I can think of that might apply. As an insurance agent, we generally obviously recommend, if you can afford it, that you purchase the coverage because it is a pretty common coverage. But as we said before, we do know that about a quarter of the clubs that purchase the general liability and participant accident are buying the D&O. So a lot of the clubs are not perceiving that need. And if you are you're smaller and you're really just focused on your club rides and you're not really involved in a lot of other activities, I think the need for that coverage is lesser. If you have employees, I think it's very important because it has the employment practices coverage to it, and that is when you talk about directors and officers and employment practices policies, the majority of claims in the nonprofit world come from the employment practices side of that. So they come from harassment lawsuits or wrongful termination or failure to hire. And obviously that's not the case with the club who posed the question.
All right, great, thank you. We are working through the questions. We'll certainly have plenty of time for more if people want to add them. I do have a long list, so sometimes follow-ups might be something we come back to later, so it was a little scattershot. I apologize. Here's a question in regards to participating. If for advocacy organizations or clubs, is there any requirement that they be legally nonprofit corporations or tax exempt or incorporated at all?
No, there is not. They do need to be an entity. So if they're not an entity, then they can't. It would be very difficult to sue them. So if they are a club, if they have a name, then they can purchase the coverage if they're a member of the league. They don't have to be a 501c3 or have any particular legal designation.
Because what happens is they get added to the league's policy. So you're part of the grand sort of group policy. You're actually, so your name is added to the league, and you're not insured independently, right? Or yes and no?
That is correct. There's a master policy, and every club or advocacy organization that buys the coverage is listed by name on that policy.
Someone has asked, will there be a brochure in PDF form with a frequently asked question section outlining the coverage for 2014? I think the answer there is yes.
Yes.
And I think we decided that we were not going to mail one out to all of our club members, which we've done in the past, because it's a lot of paper and it's little tiny print recently, and it seems like we've been doing fine with the electronic versions. In a pinch, I could always print one out and send it to you, but we won't be putting them in the mail this year. Someone asked, how is this policy better than a regular general liability policy?
I don't know what I would say is a regular quote-unquote general liability policy. I would say if you were looking at options and you were comparing, what you want to make absolutely sure of as a club that's involved with bicycle riding is that the coverage does not have any restrictions relative to that activity. And you would be surprised how many policies we see when we're comparing just across amateur sports or even across professional sports. We find that sometimes a broker or an insurance agent that doesn't specialize in this area may get a policy from a very reputable company, but they don't realize that it automatically has an exclusion or restriction on it relative to athletic activities. So you want to make absolutely sure that that is not the case, and that is not the case with this policy. It obviously does cover that activity. So I would say that is what differentiates it. If you're looking at a group program, this is a group program, but the the aggregate limit on the policy applies per event and per organization. So in essence, you do, to some extent, have your own separate limits. So I think if you were looking at a group program, you would want to pay attention to that. And then you also just want to make sure that there aren't any other restrictions. So, this policy covers fundraising, it covers your meetings, it's really set up to cover those type of things that we are aware that the league members take part in when we're talking about education. And that's evolved over the years with this program. So if you're looking at another policy, you would really want to look for anything like a designated operations endorsement that had restrictions in it, or really look hard at the exclusions. That is the advice I would give you.
I will also say that especially for small clubs and organizations, from everything that I've heard from people that have shopped, the pricing is really great. Also, because American Specialty has been working with us for so long on these policies, that when there have been instances where there are misunderstandings, you can always come to the league. You can call me, and I will try to act as an intermediary and help the American Specialty understand you and help you understand American Specialty. So you do have sort of an additional layer of recourse, and it's rarely hostile. I don't want to call it leverage, but I think there are a lot of advantages there. And you also know that American Specialty has been working with hundreds of clubs a year for quite a number of years, and does understand club activities pretty well, which is not to say you can't get those things elsewhere, but I know this has worked for a lot of people, and we try really hard to make it work.
Thank you. I think the other aspect to consider is obviously the claims management piece. With this program, American Specialty employees are managing the participant accident claims on behalf of the insurance company, and we have authority on the general liability policy to manage claims as well. So you're working with our employees. That's just another question you would want to ask if you're looking at any other options, is who is going to be managing the claims and what's their background and experience in sports-related claims.
Could you bring up your contact information again? Someone wanted to know how to get in touch. So let's put that up for a while. We can go back to the rates if we need to. My name is Scott Williams. I'm the membership director. My email address is Scott, SCOTT, at
I actually did not put our contact information. Did
I not see it at the beginning? Okay. We can all.
Just our name.
Okay. Scott, SCOTT, at bikeleague.org. My direct line is 202-621-5453. I'm happy to pass on the contact information. Oh, look, she's making the change right there.
I will add it in.
One club rep who knows this policy well says to make sure that you mention that legal fees are covered outside of the policy limits.
That is a very good point. Thank you to that person.
Thank you, Ron. What is the cost for directors and officers in 2014 is one question here.
It is $575 for a $1 million limit and $875 for a $2 million limit.
Thank you. So here's a more specific question. So if a private massage therapist offers services during a week-long ride, so overnight, doing some massage therapy, are there any special insurance concerns about that? Riders would be paying the person individually, so she wouldn't be working for the club.
As long as it's not being provided through the club, so the club's collecting the money, or it's an automatic part of your experience. If it's something that people can optionally hire that person to provide, then I don't see really the exposure to the club. I think my thought would be, if you have an arm's length relationship like that, then keep it arm's length, so don't muddy the waters and have people be confused that maybe it is provided through the club. If you really are going to provide it through the club, then I think there are some things we want to talk about separately in terms of making sure that individual is properly licensed and has the proper insurance for him or herself. But if you're, in essence, saying you have nothing to do with it and you've made that very clear, then I think it's up to the individual to figure out, if they want to trust that person or not.
Let's see. Again, talking about multi-day rides, are they considered single events for getting special event coverage?
Yes.
That's the shortest answer of the evening.
I know.
So, let's see. I'm still working through these. Okay, big, nice, important, broad question. How are clubs covered for non-bike riding activities? So club meetings or club parties, but also hiking or cross-country skiing.
They are not covered for other types of athletic activities is the distinction I would provide. So like a canoeing or kayaking trip or hiking, snowshoeing, those type of activities are not covered through this policy. Actually, when you go through the enrollment process, it asks if you do any of those type of activities, and if you say yes, it does provide you with some more background on the fact that that is not part of this program. It does cover meetings and fundraisers and those types of things that you do that are bicycling related. The actual policy wording says bicycling related activities, so it's a very broad term, but not broad enough to encompass other recreational athletic activities.
Great, thank you. So if a ride leader is not an officer or a director, do they have general liability coverage?
Yes, they would be considered a volunteer acting on behalf of the organization, and they would be covered in that capacity, and as I assume as a member as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable assumption that the ride leaders would be members.
So they do not need to be an officer or a director.
So question about the non-owned auto coverage. Is it based on one club's particular experience for the premium, unlike the general liability, which is aggregate loss?
It is, but we find, at least of the 15 that have enrolled so far through the application process, that they all end up around the minimum premium for that coverage, which is $250. And I think maybe one of them was a little more based on their individual information, maybe based on how often they were hiring or how much they spend on hiring autos a year or something like that. But that's where they've all come in so far.
Okay, I'm filtering through these again. Someone is asking how the number of members is determined when you go in to sign up. How do you know what number to put there? Because membership, of course, can sort of vary throughout the year.
We ask them to estimate what their highest membership would be during the policy period and use that number. We don't ask them to call back in during the year and change the number unless something really significant has occurred and has changed really their whole membership base. But for the most part, we find that people just do their best estimate at the beginning of the year, and then if they've had an increase, for example, during the year, then next year when they sign up again, they report that higher number, and in that way, it ultimately all turns out the way it should in the end.
Okay, terrific. Someone asked if we can simplify the requirement for non-owned auto so we don't have to get info on every car and each driver. So feedback on the policy there.
I don't know that we do. Now, if that person has enrolled, has gone through the application process, but there is an application they have to complete, which is pretty brief, and then we need to confirm that all the drivers are age 21 or older and 25 or older and have valid driver's licenses and that they have valid primary insurance. But I don't know that we ask for the name and and drive. Well, I guess I won't say that because I'm not 100% sure, but Renee doesn't think that either.
Yeah, I don't. I could look at the application quickly.
So we will take another look at it.
Yes.
And can you remind us the general liability coverage limit?
It is $1 million per occurrence with a $3 million general aggregate, but as I mentioned, that aggregate applies per club and per event. And as I guess it was Ron pointed out, the defense costs are not subject to that limit. So they're, in essence, unlimited.
Okay, a club conducts an Adopt a Road cleanup 3 times a year. Does the policy apply and cover their members while they're doing the road cleanup?
We face, oh, sorry, Renee's giving a face. I wish I had my exact wording relative to trail maintenance. We generally do cover that type of club activity if they're doing light maintenance and that type of thing, not if there's any construction involved. But we have had a couple situations come up with an Adopt a Highway that was a little different from what we didn't feel it was consistent with that type of a program. It was, say, for example, that the club was responsible for a particular stretch of road for an ongoing type of situation for an entire year. Now, what you're mentioning sounds like more of a one-day activity, and I think that would put it in a different category. So that might be one that we either need to get more information to do follow-up directly with the club or provide enough follow-up answer.
Okay, so we can do some follow-up. I know who has asked the questions, and anything we don't get to tonight, we'll look over those questions and make sure that we follow up with anybody just to make sure that we have fully answered the questions. And like I said, anything that we don't get to. And is there specific coverage for ambulance service or first aid for a race? Okay, talk about racing and time trials. Here's your opportunity.
Okay, well, racing is not covered because the policy is intended to be for recreational bicycling, but it can cover time trials if somebody is just going for their personal best as opposed to they're racing the person next to them or on the same course. So it's the racing exclusion doesn't apply to timed events necessarily, but it does apply to anything where 2 people are in a speed competition against each other. This program just is not a fit for that. So if you are a racing organization, you definitely want to look into an alternative type of program. And what was the other part of the question?
I think that was mainly it. It was about first aid and ambulance coverage, although it was specifying a race. But just for a regular ride, how would ambulance or first aid fees be covered?
If there is a medical bill incurred that is directly related to an injury that occurs during an event, then that would be eligible for coverage under the participant accident. Again, it's going to be after your insurance pays. If you had somebody there as a first aid station and there's no bills incurred, that wouldn't trigger the coverage because there's not a bill to pay. So in other words, we couldn't pay for the first aid responders to be there.
Okay, good. And I am looking at, I know there are a couple of themes where we often have questions. And so one is simply, how do we, so the coverage applies to rides that are conducted and supervised by the club, correct? That's the wording. I think I know it by now.
Okay, right.
Right, okay. One of the few things I'm confident stating about this policy unequivocally. But the question is, how do you determine if a rider is on a club ride. If they take a shortcut to try and catch up, are they still on the ride? If they go directly home instead of finishing the ride, are they considered on the ride? When are riders actually covered?
Well, what happened in the event of a claim, so this would be true for the participant accident or the general liability, is that an official of the club needs to sign the incident report form, and they are basically representing whether the person was injured on the ride or not on the ride. So it does end up falling somewhat within the club's discretion of what the club thinks is part of their ride or is not part of their ride. Because we're not in a position really to come in and say, well, that person wasn't part of the ride. If the club's officers and officials believe that if the person was participating and you represent that, I can't think of any situation where we have questioned that scenario. And I can also say that of the claims that we've had, and again, we said there aren't a lot, but some of them are larger, we've never had one that fell in that gray area. Although it's good that we talk through it and we think about it, it's very important, but I'm just saying from a practical standpoint, we haven't had a situation where it was questionable, like this person was kind of off on their own. A lot of times they're in a group, and being in the group is part of what contributes to the injury itself, or they're on a bike path with a lot of other members, and that's why it gets confusing with maybe some of the non-ride traffic that's also on that trail. Not to say something couldn't happen when somebody has veered off on their own, but those haven't been the type of claims that have come in or where somebody's brought a lawsuit.
Okay. And so there's also some questions about waivers. People, our club members worry a lot about waivers, I think, and probably rightfully so. If they have problems with ride leaders getting non-members to sign a waiver, I guess first of all, just talk about how coverage applies for non-members, when it does and when it doesn't, and then how is that affected, whether they can get those non-members to sign a waiver or not.
Okay. The coverage, in terms of the general liability coverage, if somebody is on a ride but they're a non-member and something happens and that individual hurts somebody else or they themselves are hurt and in some way the club ends up getting sued, the club still has coverage for that if it was a regular ride or a special event. That individual, him or herself, would not have coverage under the general liability. And I can think of at least 2 claims off the top of my head where the rider who was involved in an accident was personally named. So that person in that situation would not have any insurance coverage other than maybe through their homeowners, but they would not have coverage through the GL by the first time? Oh, Renee's correcting me that the first-time rider exception could apply. But on the participant accident, the individual, again, if they're not a member and they're not a first-time rider, is injured, they would not have coverage under the participant accident policy. So that is how the coverage would apply in terms of those individuals. In terms of the waivers, I mean, I know that the ride leader isn't in a position to, I'm sorry, Renee, what it is, the first time rider, I'm sorry, the first time invited guests are also covered on the general liability. So if it's their first time that they are tagging along and they haven't actually become a member yet, we do afford that coverage. And the idea behind that has always been that you are giving them an opportunity to see if they want to join, to participate, and then hopefully they will join after that first time. I know that that's not always the way of the real world, where sometimes you have people coming back numerous times and they never become a member despite your best efforts. But for that same person, in terms of the waiver, basically what happens is if your insurance coverage is not compromised in any way by the fact that the person didn't sign a waiver, but you've just lost a critical protection that might be available to you if that person is injured. Because by signing the waiver, they basically say that they agree not to bring a lawsuit against the club if they get injured while they're participating. And if they sign that waiver, and it varies by jurisdiction how strongly they are upheld, but if you're in a good, strong waiver state and you can present that waiver, you are often able to get the club out of the claim quickly without paying much in terms of defense costs and without paying any judgment or settlement. And we do have examples where we've had plaintiffs' counsel say they're going to dismiss the case once they realize there's a waiver involved. So they do have quite a bit of value. Again, it does vary by the jurisdiction. They provide a lot stronger defense in the case of an adult than they do with a minor. But it doesn't impair your coverage if you weren't able to get that person to sign a waiver.
Okay, and if someone has signed a renewal waiver, when they renew, they sign a waiver as part of their renewal form. I think generally we don't, that once a year has been considered sufficient. Is that still true? They don't need to sign a waiver every time if they've signed once a year and they're members. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct. And we do have on the website, we have sample waiver and release forms that you can use, both an individual form and one that has an opportunity for multiple people to sign on their own line. And I know it's not always the easiest thing to incorporate all that language, but they are drafted specifically to meet the requirements for as many jurisdictions as possible across the country, and the language has been tested. So to the extent you can use those, we highly recommend it, and also to have input from an attorney, if you have an attorney available to you through your board or any other outlet, to have somebody who knows the local laws who can look at your waiver in that context. You want to have a separate signature on it and not have it be the same signature that they're signing to say, yes, I want a T-shirt, and yes, you know, I want to volunteer for this activity, and yes, I want to be a member. You want the waiver to be its own separate thing so that they can't say, oh, I was just signing that for the T-shirt and not because I wanted to waive my right to sue. So that's just something else to keep in mind.
Okay, I have just a general question about how to find out more and get answers to other questions, or have the policy generally explained. And I think any of us here on the call are happy to take those calls. You can call me, Scott Williams, at the League at 202-621-5453. Renee's contact information is up there on the screen. Renee is, I think, more typically in the office and available than Marla is. So I think Renee might be the better choice there. If you haven't been through the process, either because you're not currently insured or you're not the person that did it, if you go to the American Specialty website and walk through the process of applying for insurance, there's a link that says Purchase Insurance. I always encourage people who have questions about the policy to just step through that. Even if you're not yet a League member, it's okay. I forgive you if you say that you are for the purpose of walking through that. I do want you to sign up as a League member before you actually complete the purchase. But one of the things that American Specialty has done for us they've created an interactive process. So you answer some questions as you go along, as Marla's referred to a couple of times tonight, about what your activities are. And it gives you information back about whether you're covered or not for that, or whether you need an optional coverage to get that. So that's a good way to get educated about the policy, as are the other materials available at that site. But then, you know, calling one of us to talk through it, depending on whether you're one of those people who likes to research everything on the internet before you talk to anybody, or whether you're somebody who'd like to start off with a conversation. Anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything from my end. I guess Renee and I were saying we should have put Chris's contact information up here as well, as she will be probably talking to a lot of people with their calls, but we will be directing those calls too within our office if people, I didn't put our 800 number up here either, but if people call the 800 number, which is 800-245-2744, and you just indicate you are with the League of American Bicyclists, then you will get directed to any one of us who will be able to answer your call.
Okay, I'm going to do just a couple more questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. Like I said, I have a record of all the questions, and I can follow up with people if we didn't get to it. Another question that's come in a couple of times now, and we often discuss, is the question of electronic waivers. And I know that the answer has become a little longer and more nuanced since we last discussed it. So, electronic waivers, go.
Electronic waivers, our opinion is they are here to stay, and we have now had some case law, I believe, where they have been upheld. So one thing we now know.
Uh-oh. You there?
I don't know. You still hear me?
Yep.
I'm here. Something
Okay.
just happened. We do know that in the event we need to utilize an electronic waiver, that you want to know that whoever you are working with to create the waiver, whether it be someone like an Active.com, you want to make sure that you'll be able to work with them to get a copy of the waiver language, that they are able to show that that's what the person clicked yes to, or however they do it. And they'll also need to be able to provide support information on what the process was that the person followed, more on the IT side. So if you're designing it yourself, you need to make sure you can document it. If you're working with a third party, you want to actually talk to them and say, okay, if there's a claim and the insurance company says we need to be able to, A, see what language the person agreed to, and B, document the technology steps through which they got to this standpoint. And I'm not using the technical terms, which I have written down somewhere, but basically that's what they need to be able to do, is to show what that process was. So whereas with a hard copy waiver, we say, send it to us, and then we have the language and we know the person signed it, with the technology piece, you need to be able to show the process in the language. So you'll need to be able to document that. And we have had a case where we were able to utilize an electronic waiver as a defense tool, but there was a little bit of a challenge in working with a third-party vendor in that case, but ultimately we were able to get what we needed. So it'd be good to have that discussion up front.
Great. I'm going to have one last question. When will the website be open for signing up for 2014 insurance?
Well, I know we're going to take the website down January 1st so that nobody accidentally signs up for 2013. We would like to have it back up by the middle of January at the latest. That's the plan.
And we are having the kickoff webinar on Monday, January the 13th. I believe that is correct.
Right. So,
yep.
Yes, that is true. So we will need to have it available in time for that, because people will want to go on after we have that discussion.
Okay. Marla Peters, thank you very much. Senior Vice President, I think I skipped the senior when I was introducing you at the beginning, for American Specialty, who have been working for a decade with the League on our insurance program. We will follow up with everybody. If you've got a question we haven't been able to answer, we will try to send you an email in the next couple of days to follow up on that. Certainly make sure you have the information you need before the insurance sign-up period begins. And thank you very much, everybody that attended, and we'll be talking to you soon about the insurance. Thank you very much for the information.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Renee.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.